Welcome to this webinar on preventing future harm. If you haven't had a chance yet to complete the pre-test survey that I sent you, asking you to fill out 8 multiple choice questions before the content of the webinar began, please do it now. My name is Dr. Pearl Berman. I'm going to be your host, so if you see the email at the bottom of the screen, don't hesitate to email me if after the webinar you have any questions. This webinar was created by a collaboration of sponsors that you see on this screen. And now I would like to give you a brief overview of what the main topics of the webinar will be. What is resilience?
Hey, Pearl.
Yes.
I would suggest let's just wait a few minutes for people to come in because we still have people who are rolling in.
All right, fine.
Yeah, let's just give it a couple minutes because we just opened it up and it's just 11. And I think if we wait a few minutes, we'll have some more participants available. And as Pearl noted, today is preventing violence. And if you have not completed the pre-test, the pre-session survey, I just put it in the chat. And I'm Katie Gotch, and I serve on the MPEIV board, and I will be serving as your moderator today and also one of your speakers. And we're very excited to have you here today. And I would just say, let's give it about another minute or so, Pearl, to let some people come in and start at about 11:01 my time, which is, oh goodness, I can do math, 2:01 your time on the East Coast. That took me a minute. So yes, and I hope everyone is doing well today. And yeah. And we're very excited to be here and presenting to everyone. And just for a few logistics, if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat or to use the Q&A feature. I will be keeping track of that and assisting the other speakers, and hopefully you guys can assist when I'm speaking. And yes, so please in the chat or in the Q&A function, and we can unmute during the Q&A portion of the training if that's something that might be of interest to people, but it's easier for us typically to handle through the chat and the Q&A. And we will be handling questions at the end. So we will be doing all 4 of the presentations, and then we will handle the questions during the Q&A portion at the end. So wonderful. And I think, Pearl, I will give it back to you after doing all of the logistics, and welcome everyone. And we're very excited to have you today. And again, pre-survey is in, link is in the chat. If you have not done that, please do that as we're getting rolling. I hand it over
All
to
right.
you.
Well, thank you very much, Katie. I just wanted to once again then acknowledge the sponsors who have made it possible for us to give you this free webinar and to thank them again. And today we've got the following main topics to cover. What is resilience? The important fact that resilience is more powerful than adverse experiences. Why it is critical that we have trauma-informed public policies. And the power of public policies that support resilience in children, families, and communities. And now I'm excited to hand off the conversation to our first speaker.
It is with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce Stacy LeBlanc. She is the co-founder of the UP Institute and the president of the American Professional Society of Abuse on Children, APSAC. She is a passionate advocate for children and an attorney with a master's degree in education. After 32 years of responding to child abuse, first as a supervising prosecutor of a child abuse unit that maintained a 94% conviction rate, and secondly, as an executive director of 2 child abuse nonprofits, the New Orleans Children's Advocacy Center and the Audrey Hepburn Care Center, Stacy moved upstream to solve child abuse, providing consultation and trainings. She has created sought-after programs, including Beyond Mandatory Reporting, Dear Parents, Teens, Sex and the Law, and Painless Parenting. Stacy has provided over 750 interactive trainings for more than 53,500 individuals focused on translating research into successful practice. She has published 5 books for children and multiple articles on the benefits, evaluation, and implementation of prevention programs such as No Hit Zone. Stacy chairs the National No Hit Zone Committee for the National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment and serves on the National Review Board for the U.S. Catholic Bishops. She has received numerous awards, including Outstanding Prosecutor, FBI Director's Community Leadership, and Champion for Children for successfully passing 11 legislative bills. Beyond family and pets, Stacy's greatest joy is inspiring undergraduates with a highly rated ACEs CAS course at Tulane University. And it is my great pleasure to hand over the presentation to you, Stacy.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Berman, for coordinating this wonderful opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects. And one thing I should do right offhand is update my bio. I'm recognizing I am now the immediate past president. I was able to pass the gavel off a week ago to Dr. Ernestine Briggs King, and I'm so excited to be able to support her in that role. And I continue to serve in APSAC as chair of the Professional Education and Training. So if there's any other training opportunities we can bring to you, like the one today, we would just please reach out and let us know. But my journey in child abuse really began as a prosecutor. I spent the first 10 years of my career prosecuting and holding, in most cases, parents and people that were well known to the family accountable for grave sins they had committed on children, child sexual abuse and severe child physical abuse. But I recognized pretty soon that we were never going to prosecute our way out of this epidemic called child abuse, and that I really wanted to be more part of the solution. So I went to Children's Hospital, and for 19 years, I started a medical program and trained young doctors, young pediatricians and experienced pediatricians to do no harm when it came to the forensic work of evaluating kids where there'd been an allegation of sexual abuse, physical abuse, or severe psychological maltreatment. And I truly enjoyed and loved doing that work. But I'm so glad that after 30 years of being what I would call downstream, helping families navigate and solve abuse after it has occurred, I really am enjoying my time upstream in trying to prevent it before it occurs. Because we know there are so many simple solutions that we know through programs like Darkness to Light and Stop It Now and Start by Believing, and also No Hit Zones, that there's so many simple things that we can do as professionals to really address the key risk factors to prevent it upstream. And so I always like to start there before we launch into a powerful talk about resiliency. And you're going to hear from huge leaders like Dr. Berman and Dr. Thompson about resiliency after abuse has occurred. But I always want to make sure that we're focusing on, we want to prevent it before it occurs first and foremost. So I was asked to launch us first to talk about what do we know about resiliency as it relates to ACEs? But before we go there, before I start telling people a lot about ACEs, I want to know how many of you, let's be interactive here in the chat. Tell me how many of you have heard of ACEs, and please be brave. If you've not, just say, nope, haven't heard of them. But I just want to know before I launch into a lot of information on ACEs. So yes, Lisa tells us that yes, she has heard of ACEs. That's all I'm asking. A simple yes or no will do in the chat. Just want to know before we go into it. So we got 2 yeses, but we have a lot of yeses. So this is good news. So I can really jump right into where we want to be. But assuming, since not everybody's answered, that maybe we might have a few that haven't, I just want to give a really brief overview. And I now teach a class on adverse childhood experiences. And thank you. Please, we are interested in who's attending today. So please tell us about your professional background. But I now teach a class at Tulane University on ACEs. It's a CAS course, and where we're teaching undergraduate college students before they launch their careers, whether it be as an attorney or a prosecutor or a defense attorney, a child's attorney, a guardian ad litem, or as a social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist, medical doctor. In our course, we basically have a third of our students are public health graduates, third are pre-med, and a third are going into helping professionals in mental health. And what we teach them is that we recognized many, many years ago in the Sentinel article and Sentinel research that was done by Dr. Felitti and Dr. Andy, that they discovered a critical link between childhood adversity and later bad health outcomes. And in this particular study, if you didn't know about this, I always think this piece of trivia is so interesting, is that it was accidentally discovered. It was in an obesity study of over 17,000 participants where they recognized that the wrong question was asked. And that instead of asking how old you were when you were first sexually active, the question was asked, and how much did you weigh? And many participants were responding with 40 pounds. And the research assistants were kind of going, wait a minute, 40 pounds, that's a pre-adolescent weight. And so they recognized that there was something here that was a critical link of people being involved with having obesity issues, and that was associated with having experienced the adversity of child sexual abuse. Well, this was replicated over and over and over. And in the ultimate study, what they found that there was a critical link between these 10 adversities in childhood and poor health outcomes. And what was so extraordinary to me is that, child sexual abuse and child physical abuse, which so many of us on this call have dedicated our careers to, but what we didn't recognize is that there was some type of link between all of these. And then when there was a polyvictimization of 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more of these, that it was linked to a lot of bad health outcomes. And that they found that childhood trauma was very common, that even in the initial study where it was employed white, middle class, college educated folks, what we consider good health, that there was this link. And so when it's been replicated in so many states and been shown that the link is even exists across races, across socioeconomic, and we're recognizing now that there are protective factors, but that there's definitely a direct link that's been recognized. And what they also recognize is that a whopping 2/3 of the folks had experienced multiple of these adverse childhood experiences, many of whom have never told anyone. And so this study, which has been replicated in many states, shows that this polyvictimization, this toxic stress of multiple forms of exposure or victimization, is really bad for our health. Now, I have a good friend who's in public health, and she's sort of like, we could have said this without the study, right? We would have been like, duh, yeah, bad things happen in childhood. But this study actually showed it. They showed it in all of the research, and they recognized that these ACEs led to poor health outcomes. And so since we have so many that are aware of ACEs, I'm not going to go into all of this today, but if you aren't aware, or if you're a policymaker, also recognizing that in addition to knowing that these ACEs in the social science studies, they've been replicated in knowing that now that it shortens telomeres, which is the little cap on the end of our DNA, and that there's a number of epigenetic studies that have also been replicated to show that there is definitely an association between this toxic stress of adverse childhood experiences and bad health outcomes. And for policymakers, also recognizing that this has a cost to society. So I want to encourage everyone, if they haven't heard about ACEs, to get their ACE score. But where I love when I'm talking about ACEs is to also encourage everyone, and this one, this particular site, completely free. You can also get your resilience score. And there's many different ways to achieve getting your resilience score, but I think it's an important piece because we now realize that there are protective factors, and that studies are showing that there are relationships in our life that were protective. There are many different things. There may be many of you that are on this call that have excelled in school and had intellectual capabilities that maybe others didn't, and those were protective in your life. And so we really want to make sure that we understand what we can understand about ACEs, but what can we do about it? Now, first and foremost, before I launch into any talk about resiliency, I always want to go upstream and saying that I am not here in any way saying, well, let's not worry about adverse childhood experience and preventing it, and let's just help kids bounce forward after they've experienced it. First and foremost, my heart is upstream in preventing it. But we recognize we can't bubble wrap kids, right? Adversity in childhood is common. And as hard as we all try and dedicate our lives to preventing it, there are going to be adversity that kids experience. Now, we also recognize that resiliency alone is not enough. We want them to have exposure to evidence-based trauma therapies, and there are a number of them, and I want to point those out. The National Children's Alliance has identified the types that are evidence-informed. But we also want to recognize that even when we can't prevent them and kids have experienced ACEs, that there is a component of resilience that can trump and can overcome, even sometimes without. We would prefer that they get the evidence-based therapies, but even when we don't, in the communities maybe can't afford such, we know now that there are certain things that we can do to help with resilience. And so I love this particular quote, it's not mine, is to remember that the A score is not a crystal ball. It's just meant as guidance. It tells us about a risk factor, about our health, and that we know that there are people who spoke to their 101. But we also know that there are certain things we can do that can influence us and help us to address this. Now, my best way to talk about resiliency, I like to talk about in the original 10 ACEs that were discovered in with Dr. Flaty's original study. One of the things that was not on the list was having a parent who died. Now, as a child that grew up in a wonderful, loving, and nurturing home, I cannot even imagine how having a parent who died would not be considered an adverse childhood experience. And so I was on a panel at IVAD with National Initiative to End Corporal Punishment that Dr. Berman's a part of. And I got to ask Dr. Flaty, and I said, how can it be that having a parent die in childhood is not on the study? And he said, well, technically it can be if it's associated with shame. But he goes, I want you to think about it for a moment. What happens? What happens? So I want all of you in the chat. What happens if a child has a parent who has died and they go back to school and the first time the crossing guard sees them? What's the crossing guard going to do? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What do you think is going to happen? And what happens in communities? What happens if someone in your neighborhood has someone that's died? What goes on? What do people do? What do church communities, neighbors, what do folks do? I'm gonna wait you guys out, see if I can get you in the chat. What type of things? Sympathy, what type of things do they do? So like their crossing guard is likely going to hug that child. They're going to give them sympathy. How do they express that? They're going to bring food. Right. Absolutely. They're going to be a casserole. I cannot cook, but I have a casserole that I make if anyone dies. I don't know if it's any good, but it is my way of expressing some energy and some sympathy. But think about it. If that same child who hasn't had a parent who died has a parent who's incarcerated, what is going to happen when they arrive back at school? Are people going to know? It's likely in the paper. The neighborhood knows, the schools knows, but we don't see this. There are no casseroles. And so what we find is when there's shame associated with these type of adversities, that there is not this outpouring of sympathy. There's not this outpouring of effort in order to buffer and somehow provide some protective factors for that adversity. So sometimes we can't prevent the adversity, but we can change how we support. And what we know in the number of studies that children's perception of social support and social reactions to abuse can influence their mental health outcomes and their recovery and their ability to find supportive relationships. So what I love about this is there's so much now that we know, and that knowledge can be powerful because resiliency has been shown that it can be increased. And Dr. Thompson's going to show you a bunch of ways to do that with children. And so we know that there are people with high A scores that do remarkably well, and that our resilience can build throughout life with close relationships, of course, we want to make sure that they get evidence-based trauma-informed therapy. Now, I would be negligent to not talk about the history. And so when I go back, and lots of people say different folks are the historians, but to me, where I first learned about resiliency and where my studies led me was basically to Dr. Gamazzi, who was a psychologist who was studying, basically uncovered, he wasn't studying resiliency, but he was studying adversity. And it was noted to him in schools that there were certain kids that stood out that shouldn't be doing well, but were. And in this case, what he talked about in his discovery was there was a one boy who always brought 2 pieces of bread, no meat between the bread, tucked under his shoulder, tucked under his arm every day to school. And this child had every adversity at home. He had an alcoholic mother. He had experienced child sexual abuse. He had experienced lots of issues at home, had very little to no food at home. But yet somehow he managed to get a loaf of bread, to bring 2 slices to bread. And everyone in the school said he stuck out as being different. And what he recognized is that there was a piece that this child was exhibiting positive deviance, that this child, in the face of so much adversity, had so much gumption and ability to do this. And he stuck out. And so his studies started looking at the children that stuck out, that stood out as bouncing forward, as not being impacted, and what could we learn from them? Now, of course, we want to prevent it. I keep saying it over and over. But positive deviance in children has been replicated in countries where there's malnutrition. There's been a lot of going in and looking at, well, wait a minute, there's malnutrition and folks are not having the same, they all have the lack of resources. So same lack of resources in all homes. And yet they'll bring in certain things for soup. And yet some kids don't show signs of scurvy. They don't show signs of malnutrition. What was going different? And one of the studies showed that when they went in instead into the homes where the kids were doing poorly, they went into homes where kids were doing well, they recognized that families were doing something very odd. They were taking a cup and going down deep into the soup bowl before they served the children. And they recognized that the meat, the little piece of meat that all families were being given, some families were digging deep and that protein was going into that soup bowl and children were getting that protein. In other families, they were ladling it right off the top and the children weren't getting that protein. And they recognized with just giving families ladles and going to the bottom of the soup bowl was helping with nutrition. And that's just it's an amazing study that's been replicated in Peace Corps all over, and showing if they go and get little rice patties, and that the families that were substituting, because they were having the families go out and shrimp the little rice patties to put into their soup, that was a part of this positive deviance. It was this resilience. So I love when we're talking about resilience. Resilience is defined by many different folks, and I would never want to impose my definition. But the one that always comes to me, I don't like to say bounce back, because I think that in some ways we need to think about adversity. We know it has an impact on DNA. It can have an impact on brain structures. Doesn't necessarily mean it impairs, and we can bounce forward. And so I like to think of it in terms of how are we bouncing forward? How are we learning from those who do bounce forward in the face of adversity, so that we can replicate that in our own adult lives and in the families that we serve? And that and in this particular quote really got to me, is that some resilient children were especially unlucky, but yet they still showed adversity. I mean, they still showed their ability to bounce forward. So I definitely want to make the point that we want to prevent the adversity first and foremost. We want to make sure they get the therapies, but there are things that we can do. Now, there are great resources, and I would be absolutely amiss if I did not point out the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. NCTSN, Google it, has a ton of resources. I also love the resources that were promoted during COVID. I actually took a class at Yale, free online, it's still free, on the science of well-being. And I learned so much that Dr. Laura Santos really helped me get through, because she helped me increase my resilience in a time that was very, very difficult for all of us. And I found, and it's still free. I always tell people, when I teach my class at Tulane, I always say this summer, instead of taking a summer break, I want you all to take a class at Yale. And they're like, we couldn't get in. And I'm like, yes, you can. This is a free class. We can all get in and we can all benefit. The other thing I love to talk about is that resilience can be a mindset. And I love this book by Emmons. If there's a book you're looking for a beach read, consider this one. Some people are like, oh, are you promoting a gratitude journal? Well, gratitude journals actually work, and people will kind of roll their eyes at me when I talk about this. But gratitude journals really do work. And I experienced gratitude on a personal level after Katrina. After Katrina, I had a tree that literally took my roof off of my daughter's room, and the tree landed in my son's room. And we had to redo all of our sheetrock, both up and down. And we couldn't get back into our homes until after Rita had passed. So all that water, but I didn't flood. I did not flood. And I always say I was so lucky because I didn't flood. And people are like, well, that doesn't sound very lucky. You had to rebuild your whole house. But in my mindset, I was so lucky compared to so many others. And I do think that you can learn a lot from us who did endure with Katrina, and that it took many, many years, and we're considered a resilient set of people. And many people say, why do you live there? I can't imagine living anywhere else. I don't know why y'all all don't come live here. But I have learned so much through the hard times in my life as the easy times. And so I really do try to take that mindset into what I do. And I think that my professional career has helped me with this. I also love applying the science of resilience as it comes to the classroom. There is so much about trauma-informed schools that we can do. But I'd like to conclude today, and I think of resilience, it's sort of like whether you've never experienced an ACE in your life, and we still have adversity in our life. You still get a flat tire on a way to do a presentation, or on the way to work, or on the way to pick up your kids, and you're like, child protection is going to be called. What do you do in that moment? Do you go like, oh, this is the worst day ever? Or do you go, I'm going to be late. This is a bump in the road. I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to bounce back. And so happiness really is like a leaky tire. We all have to reinflate it. And so I'd love for all of you to just tell us, as we transition here to our next speaker, who's going to give you the real science about how to build resiliency back in children who've experienced adversity that we couldn't prevent. So I'd like to ask all of you, where is your happy place? So please add in the chat right now where your happy place is. And as we go back, I am going to stop sharing. This is how you can connect with me if I can in any way help you. And this is actually my son's photo when we first came back right after Katrina. And thank you for sharing. We have Maria saying Disney and traveling and hugging people. I do love hugs. I'm going to stop sharing now. And over to you, Michelle.
I signed up for that course, Stacy. I haven't started it yet, but I did after I moderated the session last month. I was like, that looks really valuable. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. It's with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Michelle Madsen-Thompson. As a trauma counselor for over 25 years, she is a research and teaching faculty member at Florida State University College of Social Work. She specializes in resilience-based intervention and measurement with underserved children, adolescents, and families experiencing trauma, poverty, and abuse. She has developed trauma resilience scales for children and adults in the US, as a Fulbright scholar with Shanghai Children's Medical Center and children living in poverty in Hong Kong, and now with Spanish-speaking migrant children. Her team is actively creating an AI resilience app with Prometheus, I'm going to butcher that, Michelle, I'm sorry, Prometheus R in Czechia, and UCF Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy and Team Firestorm and Brand XR in Orlando. During COVID, Dr. Madsen Thompson released resilience briefs for children to help with safety and protective factor building. She is an International Academy on Violence Abuse board member and presents regularly on the implementation of protective factors following trauma for school, counseling, foster care, military, medical, and high-risk community settings. Thank you so much, Michelle. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So today we're definitely talking about resilience. I'm going to talk about a little bit in terms of complex PTSD. We're going to talk about resilience in general, but the newer thing is complex PTSD. And one thing I wanted to talk about PTSD that's interesting is that with most other mental health diagnoses, you're looking at outliers on a normal curve. But post-traumatic stress is something that any of us pushed hard enough, whether that be in Ukraine, whether that be through COVID, we can all experience it. And so I see it a little bit differently than some of the other mental health issues. That's me. So here's my little version of bouncing forward, which I love what Stacy, how she uses that, because I created this before that term was coined, and I think it applies perfectly. That we're not looking for a kid who's the top in their class. We're hoping that they're going to get back to what they would have been had they not experienced that trauma. So their skills, their protective factors, their things, the friends that they love. That's what we're looking for, is that recovery. It's bouncing forward. So this is just kind of what it looks like across the lifespan. We've collected thousands of narratives, and we're going to share a new one with you today from APSAC. We've collected thousands of narratives where we've just asked, and think about this for yourself. When going through a hard time, what helps you the most? That's all we ask. And we've clustered it. And so what we've found is just to remember across the lifespan, it does tend to change a little bit, but it is different for every person. But kids, their problem solving tends to be more internal. Their family and caretakers, they look to as mentors and people who are caring for them. And their activities are their connection to the community. What we see as we get older is that our spiritual existential views, what is our meaning of life? What is our purpose here? Especially practitioners like us, we're looking at what is our place in this world, and that's our connection to the biggest part of our world. Our family and our partners and our friends tend to take on equal roles as opposed to parent-child roles. And our active diversions, our inner strength and counseling tend to be things that we're doing for ourselves. Sometimes we're also doing them as part of the community, but not as much as kids. So this is just our definition. Resilience is seen when we're immersed in the positive influences across all those ecological systems, and they act together to offset trauma and risk factors, and they range across all the environmental influences. So how do we implement them? So let's talk about what they are at first. So you're going to get a few more from our practitioners, which we think is amazing, that we're actually creating resilience in ourselves in a way that we hadn't expected. I had the lovely opportunity of being able to speak at APSAC to the whole community. And we just asked as they went in with a QR code, hey, what helps you the most? And we as practitioners, those of you coming here today, learning how to do this, we have additional ways that we're helping ourselves to turn around and help others. These, however, the ones that we found are pretty consistent across cultures. Self-value, just remember, it's a little bit different from self-esteem. Self-esteem is me thinking I'm great. If I've just been through a traumatic event, watching a beating in my home, I'm not valuing myself so much, but I can take care. I'm not esteemed. I'm not thinking, oh, I'm great, but I can value myself enough to get up out of the bed, to keep going, to keep eating. Goals like that are sometimes where we start when we're working with someone who's been through severe trauma. Self-regulation is one of my favorite. We use it in our groups. We use it with kids. We talk about being up and down regulated. And if you're just feeling down, what can you do to help yourself feel a little bit better? Who do you call? What do you do? Do you go run down the block? If you need to down regulate, do you take a yoga class? So self-regulation is a two-part series where you're recognizing if you're kind of up or if you're kind of down. Like if I'm feeling down and depressed and I just didn't want to do this today. Not the case. I'm feeling excited and energized. And so I have to make sure that I don't get too excited. Hopeful future goal setting goes hand in hand. It's having hope for the future and then setting a goal to get there. So it includes that hope. And what we found is those combined together statistically So it's setting any goal with a kid, with an adult that you can, to help them take that hope and turn it into a dream, and then turn it into an actual, even if it's something very, very, very small. And what we do is we use the problem solving to help that person get to that goal. So you may say, okay, well, I just really want to be able to sleep better. And I'm sure you've had lots of people you've worked with following trauma that sleep is just rough. So what are some of the things you're going to do to get there? Is there, a special song you could listen to? That's the problem solving part. Is there a blanket you can use? Is there a specific time you can make sure you try to get to bed? Is there a wind down routine? So those are some of the things that we might put into that goal. Supportive belief structure is something that is very interesting, because if it's intrinsic, it's very, very protective. If it's forced on someone, it's not. And that makes a lot of sense. But we found that it just doesn't hold together when it's forced on someone. So if someone feels forced to be a certain type of a person, it's not going to be as protective as if they say in their heart, when I pray, I really do feel different. I feel like maybe somebody's up there listening to me. When I do that yoga or that meditation, I feel connected to the world. And I think that maybe it's not going to be quite as bad. Maybe when I'm out in nature and I look at the mountains, or I look at here in Florida at the beach, and I say, this is just stunning. We're part of something so big. So that supportive belief structure, you look for that peace that is the calmness and that mindfulness that we're trying to implement. Family and friends are really, really important. They're usually the top that we get, number 1 and 2, when we ask these questions. And it only takes one. Just remember that. If you're working with a family, a kid who I have 3 kids that came to live with me after their parents both passed away. That was a very disruptive space. So we helped them reach out to each other really well. We made sure that we brought them all into our home. We became their permanent guardians. We made sure, I try to make sure that I send them a text every time it's the anniversary of their dad's or their mom's death date. So it's bringing them back to, what did you learn from them? How can you be that legacy for them? So family can look a lot of different ways. Mine has a bunch of kids in it from different families, and we respect all of those heritages. Their friends, again, it only takes one. We found that sometimes that most popular kid is the one who's being like, people are clawing at that kid's status. And so they're actually feeling very lonely. You can also have a kid who doesn't seem to have any friends. And if they have one best friend, they're doing great. So it just takes one really close, kind friend. And that's something that you who are school social workers or associated with kids, really, really important to help them find that one person, and maybe even adjust their schedules so that they can be part of that kid's life a little bit better. Academic support is not correlated with GPA. I like to tell people that. We don't know why, but we think we know why. And I always love to give Sarah Hembry a shout out. One of my kids who was actually affected the most by the death of her parents. They were all split up into different placements, and hers was not healthy. And so technically for a little while, they were homeless in our home. And so she was assistant principal. She got her name on the roll. She sat there and she goes, okay, I'm going to put you in as their temporary guardian. And until you get full guardianship, we're going to just put you down and we're going to help you as much as we can. I got so much support from the school. The music teachers, I had known the music teacher. I'd actually been in the same singing group that they were when I was young. And I knew her, and I'd known her for years. And she goes, I got your back. We got this. And we worked together to make sure that they were okay. So that academic support brought those GPAs back up. And proud to announce that young lady just graduated from Florida State with an arts degree. Active diversion ties into that too, right? Because academics can be your active diversion, but just anything that makes you feel good. That being on a team, I have a daughter that plays worlds with Venezuelan team in ultimate frisbee. Who knew that was even a thing? But every time she comes back from playing a game, she's just on cloud 9. Things are all well with the world, especially being part of the world that way. But it doesn't have to be big like that. It can be someone who sits and knits and it calms them. That I know someone who knits, and the needles, that sound of the needles is just so calming to them. So it can be anything, finding that for that person so that it's theirs and theirs alone. Supportive community, we know that across cultures that expands. In some cultures, that community can be a family member, a family, it can be maybe a church group. As you get to other cultures, it can be the entire nation. In China, when we were collecting data, some people said that it was the entire nation. In America, we tend to have a community that's a little bit smaller, but not true of all of our ethnicities. So ask, what is your supportive community? It might be that the kid's Catholic and they're part of this world religion. It may be that they're Islamic and that they find security in wearing hijab and abaya as they turn into a teenager. So it can be a lot of different communities and how you express that. And then again, helping that kid get out of the situation if it's really, really bad. Being that I know that some of you are DCF workers, I did that for a couple of years. I worked in a children's hospital for 12 years. And sometimes we just really had to work to get those kids out. So getting those stressors and finding that other family member that might be safer. So this is exciting stuff. This is what we asked, and thank you, APSAC, for letting us do this. We had a QR code, and we had over 500 people answer this. And we just asked our practitioners, so us, what helps us when we go through a hard time? And a lot of them are the same, but let's look at what's different. So you can see they're in a different order a little bit. As practitioners, we love our activities. I know I do. I sing at church and I just have to sing. If I don't sing, I'm not happy. If you looked at beyond that window right there, that door, I'm making costumes for the high school show right now. That's me. That's what I do. I have to have it. For some reason, making Beauty and the Beast look beautiful makes me feel great about the world. Supportive beliefs. So we've got a different order: self-regulation, community. We've got those friends, problem solving, self-value, career support. We need each other. We, as when you get to be my age and you're in your 50s, you're the one who's providing that support. Those of you who are here who are young, please come to us. That's why we give these webinars. We want you to feel safe and protected and to be the best next generation for these future kids and families that are going to need us get through their trauma. So we need to support each other, peer and then peer-to-peer mentors as well. So those ahead of us, those who mentor, and then our equals. Always, always, whatever it takes, being there for each other. Affirmations. I loved this. And the ones that came out were so cool. It's like we know that TFCBT and the cognitive behavioral therapies, we know they work. We're using them on ourselves. Isn't that amazing? So waking up in the morning and just saying, you know what, you got this today. I do that every day. I learned that from being a CBT therapist, a trauma therapist. Get up today, you got this. And I'll say it as I'm brushing my teeth, you got this. And I call myself by a childhood nickname, Shelly, instead of Michelle. You got this, Shelly. You're going to make it today. And I feel so much better. So we're doing that. Keep it up. Symbols of support, those symbols that we see when we see that we were able to give a presentation, attend a conference, when we were able to get a certification. Maybe I'm working on forecast right now, and I'm almost through the training of being a forecast trainer. That symbol of my support and my academic support as we move forward, it's just really interesting, isn't it? So academics is really important to us, that we need to share what we know with each other. And that's why we're really glad to have you with us for this. Okay, I'm watching my time. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing most recently about that. I talked to you about how PTSD is just slightly different from other mental health issues. What complex PTSD is, and I know it doesn't really have a definition, it's not in the DSM. We have our own definition, and that's what we use. It's basically when someone's not responding to a traditional therapy or any medications. And to me, especially the medications tell me that we probably have something that's not a chemical depressive episode, but a depressive episode that's specifically related to trauma. And so we're going to address that a little bit differently. I'm not going to go over this very long, but what I want you to know about the brain is, and I always have to thank Bruce Perry because he's always giving us new information about neurology and trauma. And as soon as his articles come out, I'm like, okay, how are we going to use this? Let's try it out. But what we know is what's mostly involved is you've got your amygdala, your hippocampus, which kind of sorts stuff out and throw the energy back down into your adrenal glands so you can run and fight, flight, freeze, friend, all that if you need to. What's also really, this is the most important part right here, is your anterior cingulate cortex. And then this also is your superior temporal gyrus, this purple part. And that is why therapy and talking and supporting each other works, is because we form that hearing, that language, that connection we have with each other actually forms that social cognition, and therapy can be helpful with that. So let's go to the kid version of this. It's a lot more fun. So I have to give credit to my daughter, who's in med school, 4th year, going to be a pediatrician and work in a hospital like I did, but I'm on the PhD side. So anyway, this is just how we tell it, that same stuff to kids, that these parts may, they may feel scared. It might help you survive, but they don't have to fix the problem. So what we do is we talk about this being that big sorting place in your brain, the anterior cingulate cortex. We don't say it for kids what it is. And we say, if you see something, we got to figure out, is it safe or is it not safe? Because sometimes, I'm sure you know that with paired associations, you can have something that's completely irrelevant, a smell. A kid happened to have just been eating pancakes. I actually had this happen. A kid would, the parents were home on the weekend and they were eating pancakes. And so they ended up, the smell of pancakes was triggering. We're going to want to unpair that. But if they hear somebody say a dangerous threat, we don't want to unpair that. So we call it the great sort. So basically what happens is the paired associations might hurt or they might help us. So we're trying to figure out which one prevents further trauma and which ones keep those that are safe and needed as protective factors. What Bruce Perry taught us in one of his most recent articles is that we need mindfulness before cognition. So we need to get that kid, that person, that family breathing, praying, whatever it is that helps them be mindful, walking around in nature, sitting and listening to the beach or looking at the birds outside. Choose which associations alerting you to danger. Again, putting a person in control is really, really important when you're trying to unpair associations. So they're the ones that choose, not us. Like, yeah, every time I eat broccoli, I just get this memory. Okay, let's do it. And so then unpair all the unhelpful associations. There's one thing I do like to tell people, that your younger you just couldn't possibly know what you know now. So if you're I don't care if you're working with a 4-year-old who was traumatized at 2, or a 70-year-old that was traumatized when they were 20. You were younger when this happened, and you didn't, until you had this experience, you didn't know yet what to do. So forgiveness, self-forgiveness. So what did you already have? This is an example as an adult diagnosed with complex PTSD. This comes from our groups. I was given permission to share these. I had no clue that my protective factors were at work as a child and throughout adulthood. Interesting. So what you can do is, with groups, you just schedule one of those protective factors a week to discuss. Some need to, especially spirituality, because we'll talk one week maybe about how spirituality was used. There's spiritual abuse that does happen. If you want to read about that, go to Victor V's work, really excellent work. But what you want to do is just schedule 2 for things like spirituality, where one might be the abuse, and then the next one is their own spirituality and how to reclaim that. Reclaiming prayer, reclaiming meditation, whatever that is for them. And then what you do in individual work is you lead with their best protective factor. And then here's an example that came out of one group. They said, my sister really meant it when she said, I love you all those times. And I always give a tribute to my big sister because we love each other. So what can you bring into this paired association? You have this paired association. What can you bring into it? What this woman says, she goes, I pulled from the lessons taught to me about unpairing associations so I can work sometimes quickly through a trigger safely and eventually calmly. I don't have time today, but you can usually do this in one session for those of you who are practitioners, mental health practitioners. This is one that's just really, really quick. It was a kid who used to get locked in their room a lot. And there was one time that they had been injured before being locked in their room. And that memory was very, very scary. And they realized that they hadn't realized before, but they had a sister that was in that room with them. And they had a protective factor, and it helped them to heal from that trauma. They remembered what that sister said. They remembered, but they had forgotten it before until they started thinking about who else might be in the room. This is my favorite one to always end on. We call it the lamppost. I've gotten permission to give you this one as well. This is someone who was visiting a grandparent in a northeastern huge city up north, and they went out late at night and they decided to get food. And as they were coming back from getting food, it was just a group of cousins and brothers that every summer they went out there, and they saw this person standing under a lamppost whose face was all messed up. They were yelling at them in 2 different languages, one of which they didn't know what it was, and they had a baseball bat. And just as that person put their hand behind their back, they all ran. So what happened is they realized, here's this person now with a college degree, was a college athlete, they'd work out. And every time they went under lampposts, they got this like anxious feeling. And we realized that it was this paired association. So what we did for this person is we had them imagine the person who loves them the most. And that was grandma. And we put their grandma under the lamppost in their memory. We did the mindfulness first. We took 2 associations that were there, the grandparent and the lamppost, and we replaced the negative with the positive. And through calmness, you ask, like, how did you know that your grandma loves you? What can you tell? And by doing that, they completely calmed down and were able to start jogging the very next week. So here's some ideas. Basically, for self-value, what makes you strong inside? How do you keep getting up and going each morning? Self-regulation, we all get stressed. Just find a quiet place to calm down, breathe and relax. If you recognize, if you're down, up, if you're heightened, go down. Set one goal every week to learn something new or practice a skill you want to improve. And these can be protective factors. We do that at the end of every single session in every group I ever run. Connect to a family member. Make sure it's like online, there's so many ways to connect. Invite them. I've had phones in my sessions before. Invite them to come if they're safe. Interactive and online gaming, Zoom a friend who lives far away, reach out to those 2nd level friends and groups. I really like to talk about that one because we really missed them during COVID. Those the person who bagged your groceries at the store that you said hi to, and they're like, hey, Michelle, I'm like, I didn't get to see her. And those people, you don't realize how much those affirmations, remember, go back to practitioners, how much we need those. And so reach back out to those. Here's spirituality, make time for mindfulness each day. We talked about that. Yoga, connect with your faith leaders, call someone to pray with, or bring somebody in a deep breathing and mentalizing success. I accidentally clicked beyond, sorry. Mentalizing success is a really good way to help someone sit there and imagine themselves. If you were successful in this situation that's giving you a difficulty or reminding you of this trauma, what would that look like? Now see yourself doing that. Now give me one way you're going to get through that. Academics, learn something new, anything. We already talked about, is it knitting? Maybe. Reach out to the teacher, thank them as we reopen these schools. Boy, our teachers, I know a lot who have stopped and many who have changed schools. I have lots of teachers in my family. Lots and lots of teachers in my family. It's something that we love, and it's been rough. So reach out and thank them. Try walking, writing, drawing, music, art collaborations, sports. Community, find online communities are really good. Find positive performing, gaming, gardening, book clubs, anything you can do. My Beauty and the Beast costume right outside the door. During the question and answer, I might bring you something I'm proud of to see. But anyway, so basically, I'm going to end with this quote. I've learned about hope, and it's how it's okay to have good days and bad days. My bad days are becoming just a little easier. I'm becoming a little more resilient to work through using these protective factors and techniques I've learned. As I sit in the room weekly with other women, I find hope for the future of the younger people being properly diagnosed and given the tools not only to survive, but hopefully we will thrive. Everyone we work with and ourselves as well. Thank you for letting me come today. These are just all the people that I love, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was wonderful. And I really resonated with so much of what you said, but particularly all those 2nd level people, because we spend most of the time with that inner circle who, let's face it, they love us, but they take us for granted. So it's really nice to just pass a lot of people and have a lot of people saying hello. And I would like to start with one brief statement. Thank you so much, Katie, for being such a great help and support as this panel was developing. And she's our next speaker, and I get the pleasure of introducing her a little bit more to you. Catherine Katie Gotch has worked in the field of sexual abuse prevention for over 20 years as a clinician, evaluator, trainer, educator, and in the development of evidence-informed public policy. She currently maintains a private practice, integrated clinical and correctional services, which provides specialized clinical and consultative services related to adults with sexual behavior problems and other forms of abusive and violent behavior. She currently serves as the Public Policy Executive Board member for the Association for the Treatment and Prevention of Sexual Abuse, and as a board member for the National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence Across the Lifespan. She frequently provides training to correctional agencies, treatment providers, policymakers, and other community partners on sexual abuse specific assessment, management and treatment, static and dynamic risk, public policy, public engagement, and related topics. Take it away, Katie.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, Pearl. I deeply appreciate it. And Michelle, I just have to bounce off and let you know, I discovered adult coloring. That's one of my mindfulness activities now. And I do that with my 6-year-old daughter. We each have our coloring, but I have found that to be a beautiful thing. And I also, when we think back, a good friend of mine and I had a conversation about when we think back to those activities we did when we were younger, like I used to make chainmail jewelry or embroidery or cross stitching or making those friendship bracelets you make when you're younger. All of those activities, if you think of them, are actually mindfulness activities and ways that we can help kind of detach and do that. So I just wanted to throw that out because it's been some recent conversations I've had with some people in my support groups. And those connections. And that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. And I am shifting us into the more drier public policy portion of this, less the fun about resilience and how we can promote resilience. And I want to note that, as Pearl mentioned, I am a frontline practitioner. My practice now, I don't do treatment work anymore. But I still, a good 50 to 60% of my day-to-day work is forensic evaluation and assessment, both, pre-adjudication, pre-sentencing, so before, during that court process, as well as after post-conviction. And I work with everybody because as a forensic clinician, I need to pay attention to my roles and my biases. And I think if you go with one side, you end up getting what's called allegiance bias, meaning that you may lean one way more towards the other. But I bring that up because I bring a very different lens to public policy work. I've been doing policy work for over 15 years now, and I kind of fell into it. But I got involved with public policy work because I saw that everything that happened up there trickled down and impacted everything that was delivered at the front line. And so if we don't have good policies in place, we're not able to do good work or as effective work as if we did have good policies in place. So when we talk about what is an effective public policy, one of the things to talk about is that it is evidence-informed or evidence-based. And we hear those terms a great deal now within, the legal realm and in the mental health realm. Things need to be evidence-based. And it's important to delineate what those mean. I have evidence-informed in here because we have a large body of research that is constantly developing. And evidence-informed, in essence, differs from evidence-based because evidence-based means you have a large research foundation supporting the effectiveness of that. And because in the mental health, the criminological, the childhood adversity, all of these child protection, we have research that's constantly developing, or we don't necessarily have the robust research for things to be identified as evidence-based. Because the former generally refers to specific programs and interventions that have been rigorously evaluated and tested, whereas evidence-informed encompasses a broader array of policies and practices that are aligned with and informed by relevant research evidence. So evidence-informed is just as powerful in some ways. We're working towards evidence-based, but I want us to keep that in mind when we're thinking about policy. So it has a research basis to what we're doing. And if it is something that's being piloted or looked at as a new policy, part of that, what we need to do and what we're not very good, at least in the United States, at doing is setting up those ongoing evaluations of effectiveness, which is actually the last bullet in this slide. So we have that evidence-informed is very important. We also need individualized versus broad-based. We know that all of our interventions, whether we're working in the legal realm, in the criminological realm, in the mental health realm, in the public health realm, in the child protection realm, whatever level we're working in, one-size-fits-all approaches are not effective, nor do they work at maximizing an individual's potential. Because when we provide one-size-fits-all approaches, we're essentially doing a broad brush stroke on very complex areas that are not easily put into a single box. We also need to incorporate and make public policies interdisciplinary. We are stronger and better together. That is one of the reasons why I've remained so involved with NPEIV throughout the years, is because I have had the opportunity to learn from many different disciplines that I wouldn't normally have had regular contact with, because I work within the criminological, correctional, psychological realm, not necessarily the medical or directly the violence prevention in broader public health models. And so that interdisciplinary, that multidisciplinary collaboration, having people at the table, having lived experience experts at the table, because more often than not in the policy arena, we have a small group of people who are not hearing all of the voices that that policy can impact. So effective public policies incorporates all of these. And when we're talking about policies that are related to perpetration survivor, they're also victim-centered when we're talking about that type of public policy. And it is important to recognize that victim-centered does not automatically equate to lengthy periods of incarceration or punishment punitive-based approaches. Victim-centered means that we're hearing and we're listening to the survivors. We're incorporating what they are stating they want and need when we're developing these public policies. And then again, we have the QA piece with it, the quality assurance. And that's one of the areas we really lack here in the United States, is that ongoing evaluation of effectiveness. As my bio obviously highlighted, I have spent my 20+ year career working with perpetrators of sexual and violent crimes. And I have always viewed myself as a preventionist because we have to provide support services, education, treatment programming, accountability, all of those things to help people who have harmed learn not to harm again. And so registration reform is one of the areas I work in, because we have a number of policies that actually have the unintended consequence of increasing rather than decreasing community safety and recidivism risk potential by some of the policies that we apply. And part of that reason is those policies were passed 20, 30 years ago, and there has been no method or ability for ongoing evaluation of the effectiveness of those programs. So just a few things when we're thinking about what is truly an effective public policy. And these are really, and I like this, I was digging around for some fun pictures for this session. And I really did like this, because you have this little thing in the middle. That's really where public policy lies, in all of these different areas. And I obviously love it. And I don't really understand why I love public policy, but I do. And I've been involved in it for a long time. So we've talked about what makes an effective public policy, but what's a trauma-informed public policy, and what does that mean when we're looking at expanding how we address and look at the importance of trauma-informed care and similar practices within what we do? And it is in sum essentially the same as an effective public policy, with the addition of adding in that trauma-informed approaches or trauma-informed lens. So trauma-informed approaches really promote resilience in staff and those receiving services across all levels of a system. When we talk about all levels of a system, we're talking about top down. So you're focusing on incorporation and shifting institution or organizational culture to recognize trauma. There's an understanding of trauma across the lifespan. There's an ongoing assessment of the problems related to the trauma. And that is applied to everyone, not just the clients we serve, but as an organizational approach to how they are developing the policies and management for that organization or entity. And then that goes to political arenas as well. We can do this at high level, federal and state level legislation. We just have to have that integration of that knowledge about trauma, and recognizing that our main goal is not to cause re-traumatization through the application of that policy or that intervention or that procedure. So a program, organization, or system that is trauma-informed realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for recovery, and recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staffs, and others involved in the system, and responds by fully integrating that knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. I work with people who harm other people, and more often than not, those individuals have themselves been harmed, most often during childhood, during developmental years, and going on into adulthood. Their own traumatization and adverse experiences does not remove or mitigate the harm they cause another person. But how effective are our practices and procedures when our responses to someone who has harmed someone is to, more often than not, place them in a situation or an environment that has high likelihood and probability of re-traumatization? So just think about that. I'm talking about our legal system, but that can apply to many different systems we have. Just having a conversation with a friend who is an educator herself. She has, her child is on the autism spectrum, and discussing with her the difficulties she is having in getting him appropriate educational interventions and placement within his current school that meets his individualized needs as a neurodivergent child is heartbreaking. And she is an educator herself. And he is now he is a high functioning child. He played very well with my 6-year-old, very exuberant daughter that I have. She's that child who will tell you her name and is friends with everybody. And this boy is currently placed in a really inappropriate childhood, like classroom setting for him. And he's not getting stimulated or getting the connections and the interactions he needs to fully develop. That's another example of a system that is failing that individualization and the recognition that that kind of approach can actually be traumatizing and causing regression for this young man. So across our systems, we need to be thinking about that. And policies that promote public awareness and education for communities help us create safer and healthier environments and present those effective strategies for helping to build resilience. If we want to prevent abuse and violence and harm, we have to be building connections and resiliency, just period. And it's so important to just recognize the power that we have through that connection. So some examples of trauma-informed public policies. I'm just going to go through a few examples, and then Pearl will be talking more about expanding on. I'm doing more of the introduction on what is good public policy. So no-hit zones. You heard, I believe, both Stacy and Michelle mention and talk about no-hit zones. And what that is, it's to create an environment of comfort and safety for parents, families, and staff present in every location and facility. So a no-hit zone sets a precedent within the community, and it establishes a commitment to the promotion of effective parenting techniques by instilling that no adult shall hit a child, no child shall hit another adult, no adult shall hit another adult, and no child shall hit an adult. And I'll tell you, I've had conversations with my daughter about we're a no-hit zone. And, you know, we do not lay hands on other people in our home. And we have a conversation about what that means. But I also want to encourage all of us on this call, every single environment and place that you work in can become a no-hit zone. And making that commitment sets a, essentially communicates to those around you that this is of value to this organization or this place or this community, and that everyone recognizes that value and supports it. So it helps encourage and empower bystander intervention, and can help shift cultural, you know, kind of norms in that way when we do things like this is a no-hit zone. Some other examples that are a little closer to home for you. I pulled up some legislation in Pennsylvania. This was Senate Bill 144 that was passed in the 2019 to 2020 session. And this incorporated trauma and trauma-informed approaches within public school code, specifically requiring the incorporation of trauma-informed approaches to inform decision-making at all levels of the system, a requirement for all school employees, including the school directors, charter school trustees, to obtain a minimum of certain number of hours of training, requirement for use of evidence-based or evidence-informed approaches, and the addition of a trauma subject matter school expert plus a school principal, nurse, director with someone with direct experience in behavioral health matters was to be added to their school safety and security committee, and just additional policy pieces within incorporating and including trauma-informed approaches. And I feel that that's really important to have it in policy. I'm not sure how it has been rolled out, though, in Pennsylvania at this point, because unfortunately, policy is the first step. And then the second piece that needs to come with that is funding. And very little happens unless there is funding to facilitate those practices and happening. The child advocacy studies are another example, and this was focused on developing students' understandings of the factors that lead to child maltreatment and current responses to child abuse and neglect to ensure they work more effectively within these multiple systems. I'm sure Pearl will talk more about CAST. You heard some of that mentioned earlier. I also wanted to throw out a couple of other ones that I'm familiar with just within my own work. I'm actually here in Oregon, so I'm your West Coast person today. But the Compassion Prison Project is a pretty amazing project that is focused on, you know, to create trauma-informed prisons and communities by bringing childhood trauma awareness, education, and healing to prisons and communities in the US and globally. There are other countries that have much lower recidivism rates and also address and deal with interventions in a very more holistic and community-based model. A colleague and friend that is with the New Zealand Police, she is the psychologist with the Sexual Offense Registry. And the way they apply their registration in New Zealand is a much more wraparound holistic approach and based on reintegration and providing community supports to the individuals as they reintegrate back into their communities. Versus here in the United States, many of our policies tend to be more punitive and shame and punishment focused versus rehabilitative and preventive focused. I'm also lucky that we have a very cool organization here in Oregon called Trauma Informed Oregon. It's available to everybody, but it actually has a ton of different resources on trauma-informed programming, and it serves as a centralized source of information and resources for trauma-informed efforts. And in conclusion, I just want to, because I will be doing a nice handoff to Pearl, who will be expanding a great deal on what I'm suggesting. But just some suggestions to get you thinking about what would be a trauma-informed public policy to help prevent violence. So those early and ongoing resources for at-risk families that support positive family relationships and healthy childhood experiences. When I was having my daughter, she's turning 6 in August, so I still have a little person running around, and you may hear her while we're on, actually. Should have said that ahead of time, but I was amazed at how we here in the US, there are a fair amount of services available while you're pregnant, but it's like you have a baby and they're like, later, have fun, good luck. We have no wraparound services. We have nothing really consistent. You'll have really good programs in some areas that provide, home visits and resources initially, but it'll be a city or county level. We don't have anything that's national that really helps support some of that. And so much of this idea of, in many ways, I feel we lack the concept of community and the importance of, takes a village. Takes more than just myself to do things and be successful and create health and wellness in myself, in my community, and in my family. School environments which support positive student-teacher, student and staff relationships, access to age-appropriate mental health support within all educational settings, overarching policies that support income stability, food security, housing security. All of these things really do help us prevent violence across the lifespan. And with that, I will stop my share and I will hand it over to Pearl. And it is with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Pearl Berman. She is a full professor of psychology at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She is the immediate past president of the National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence Across the Lifespan, NPEIV. A licensed clinical psychologist, she has provided treatment for the negative impact of child abuse, neglect, and family violence. Her research studies the impact of childhood adversity on adult experiences with violence. She has received the 2019 Rosalie S. Wolf Memorial Elder Abuse Prevention Award, and she collaborated with the Zero Abuse Project to create child and adult advocacy studies, the CAST I just mentioned, which covers violence across the lifespan. She received the 2020 Child Advocacy Studies Award. Thank you so much, Pearl. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie. And what I'm hoping to do as the last speaker before our discussion period is to tie together a lot of the threads that have come from all of the previous speakers. And I'm also talking about public policy, but I don't want to bore you. I want to get you energized, even though you're probably really tired for sitting at the screen. And I want you to put lots of ideas, your great, creative, thoughtful ideas into the chat. Because if you look up at my screen, you see, once again, the common factors that have been found over and over again to build resilience in children, in adolescents, even in older adulthood. And the number one most important one is building relationships, but look at increasing your brain power. If you force yourself, even when you're tired, to try to generate ideas, it supports your own personal resilience. And you cannot help other people if you can't do things to keep yourself energized. And during COVID, it's had a very negative ability on our ability to build or increase our attachments and close relationships that help us get through the really tough times. We need to help people build their knowledge, their creativity, their problem solving. I'm intentionally going to be throwing out some ideas to you for what you might consider doing in your community that you're going to think, what is she talking about? When would we have ever done this? You probably have never done it before. Because the whole point is, let's stimulate your intelligence, your creativity, your ability to solve problems in this new world that we have that contains things like COVID in it. We need to help people learn to increase their ability to control and direct themselves. We need to help increase people's desire to master new skills. Yes, things are tough, but let's not give up. Let's get help. We need to build or increase faith and hope that life has meaning, so that while it's okay, we're feeling really down today, that doesn't mean our life doesn't have meaning. There are important things we're going to be able to do with our life. If we enhance resilience, it is our most powerful tool for reducing interpersonal violence, as well as other things we don't like in our society, like drug and alcohol abuse. We need to have more public policies that build resilience through supporting parent-child relationships. But why are they needed? Don't parents already know how to do this? Katie's already mentioned the fact that they help you in the hospital and then wave to you goodbye. Some of our parents do know what to do when they leave the hospital, but 30% of our population is estimated having 3 or more adverse experiences growing up, which could inhibit learning all the skills that might help them as adults. They may be more harmed than others by myths we have in our society that parenting just comes naturally. So if something's going wrong, it's because there's something wrong with you versus that parenting is actually quite difficult. Parenting skills need to be learned. And some of us do learn some good parenting skills in our family, but we often haven't learned enough, and they can be learned in many other teaching environments. When people think that they should just know how to be an effective parent, they're more likely to hide their difficulties from even their friends rather than reach out for help. Furthermore, we have parents in our communities who have experienced 5 or more types of adversity in their life: abuse, neglect, intimate partner violence. These are the 11 to 15% of our population who have never experienced a positive and secure attachment as a child or a supportive and safe adult relationship. Thus, they enter parenthood without the skills to build secure attachments to their infants and young children. Caregiving, whether of a minor, a dependent adult, or an older adult, is difficult and demanding. We aren't born with all the knowledge we need to do this, but we can learn the needed skills through seeking out help from needed experts in the field. But we presently have a lot of barriers to reaching out for this help. We need public policies that make access to experts across the lifespan much easier so that people can get the caregiving support they need. For example, we could ensure that all maternity hospital personnel are affected first responders who can recognize at-risk families and give them access to free outpatient support. There are mothers currently giving birth at hospitals who do not have enough positive support from family members or friends during pregnancy, delivery, or when they go home. Hospital personnel need to be able to identify these high-risk parents and be able to offer them free outpatient services, such as the nurse-family partnership. In this program, nurses visit homes twice a week for up to 2 years and provide support for parents learning how to develop effective relationships with their children. This program has been found to be very effective in reducing child maltreatment. Another strategy that they are talking about at the federal level, but we don't know if they'll provide it. We need to integrate mental health services into our school system to ensure that school personnel can be effective first responders for identifying at-risk youth and getting them access to free support. The children that are causing trouble in school, that are underperforming or are engaging in abusive substances, are much more likely to be the children who have already experienced and continue to adverse childhood events, and they need to be referred for comprehensive help, not punished or disliked by everyone at school. Math teachers shouldn't be expected to also be experts in knowing how to help students with serious behavioral and emotional problems. Policies could help support the integration of mental health within the school curriculum through having a new type of teacher certification for primary and secondary schools. This certification would be in the areas of emotional and behavioral health. This educator could help students build sources of resilience in their lives, such as how to build and maintain relationships, how to control their impulses in tough situations, constructive problem solving, and many other important skills. Just as in math and English, students would receive age-appropriate content that built from year to year to more complex social and emotional skills. This teacher would be very familiar with the mental health system, and so would know how to give what's called a warm handoff, which refers to going beyond just saying to a family member over the phone, you need to get your child help, but rather helping the family understand why getting help from this particular provider might be helpful to their family. Policies could make mental health even more accessible by having a therapist or counselor available in school, so that teachers who recognized there was a problem could literally just walk a troubled child down the hall. Policies that integrate mental health into the main institutions of our society, such as hospitals, schools, senior centers, police stations, would increase the ability to recognize and effectively respond to people who are showing the warning signs of violence or other social mental health problems, and help build a more resilient community. What could you do if you were a community member? You could call or email your senators and representatives and ask them to support policies that would make maternity wards good primary prevention sites. If they could also provide evidence-based programs like the Nurse-Family Partnership as a free referral, so that at-risk parents could easily receive these helpful resources. You could decide to make yourself an effective first responder. If you know a young parent in your neighborhood or from a group you belong to, make the time. We're all very busy, but find a way to make the time to drop by and visit. If they're looking tired or seem to be struggling, say simple things like, needing help is normal. Infants can be tough to take care of, and that they shouldn't hesitate to reach out to you if they have questions or concerns. You can show them websites such as 0to3.org, which Katie's putting up in the chat for you, which has a lot of absolutely fantastic videos and handouts to help people with parenting that are absolutely free. If you're concerned about the children in your community who may not be getting enough support from adults, they could be the teenagers that are hassling you when you're walking through the parking lot. Give a few hours a month to help children and youth in programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and provide a little more adult support to let these youth know that there are people in the community who value them and want to help them be successful in life. If you have any other ideas of what might work in your own unique community, write them down so you can think about them, or also so that we can discuss them in the chat as possible actions that could support resiliency in other people's communities. It's not just infants and young children. We need policies that can support all family relationships. There are adults in our community who are struggling with complex relationship patterns that develop between young children, teenagers, their parents, and their grandparents. In one family, the grandmother might be like a head of the household. She supports everyone in getting their needs taken care of. However, to do so, she may be neglecting her own health issues because she doesn't have time to think about herself. In others, a 10-year-old with physical challenges may be getting attention from parents that make the other siblings feel or actually be neglected, but then they feel guilty and angry about having these feelings. Let's face it, love might be infinite, but there's a limited amount of time in the day. And we have many family members with many different needs, and any one of them could feel overwhelmed or unsure what to do. We need to increase awareness that caregiving is hard and includes many skills, and to need help is normal. Public policies could increase awareness by giving more nonprofits the opportunity to contribute on our educational access channels and provide free programming to help educate people about the many different types of caregiving issues and possible solutions. For example, assume a paid home childcare worker is trying to help the 5-year-old learn their letters and numbers in preparation for kindergarten. Add to this task the fact that the child is showing some warning signs that might indicate dyslexia. How could we expect an unskilled person to handle the intense frustration this child might be experiencing, or know how to tell the parents when they came home anything more but that the child didn't want to practice? In another example, a grandmother who's developing dementia is now living with her adult daughter and grandchildren. The daughter works during the day and employs a home caregiver to maintain the grandmother's safety. Every day, when the adult daughter comes home, the grandmother asks where her husband is. The adult daughter keeps trying to get her mother to remember that he is dead, causing renewed grieving. Any adult child could struggle with understanding what to do in this situation. How could we expect an unskilled person observing the situation to know what to say to advise? Right now, home health and personal care aides provide company for dependent adults and older adults across the country. However, these caregivers, they're also needing to help these adults with daily living tasks such as bathing and dressing. Yet the person needing help now is adult-sized. So attempts to provide this help can lead to injuries. Yet, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2020, they earn an average of $29,000 a year. Would you choose to train for this job knowing you'd only earn this salary? In addition to increasing awareness that caregiving involves complex skills, political leaders need to consider supporting tax relief for paying child care, dependent adult care, older adult care, to make it more affordable for parents to get higher quality help, and for making advanced education more affordable for our future caregivers. All people are interconnected with others. Policies that build resilient caregiving builds the physical and psychological resilience of the community at large. What could you do as a community member? Use your own know-how to support families in your community. For example, remember, you might not feel like it, but you are a person with a variety of skills and experiences. Have you always been great in math? Consider providing homework support at local community centers and libraries where youth are hanging out without parents to help them with their homework. Another example, do you like talking to other people? Consider connecting with the Center for Aging in your area and calling people who are isolated seniors or shopping for them one day of the week and letting them know they haven't been forgotten. Do you enjoy your social media? Consider liking and sharing posts that are made by nonprofits who are providing free educational services to the community at large. Consider sharing the examples that you might be seeing on the 0to3.org website. Any of these steps help you further your own sense that you can do something to help and support building a strong community, because you're also building the power of the agencies in your community. Public policies should support our community relationships. Local police forces take action when episodes of violence begin. Hospitals do have emergency rooms for victims of violence, But communities don't have collaborations between agencies and stakeholders to provide ongoing, coordinated community action to support resilience. These collaborations would decrease the likelihood of violence happening in a community. Different collaborations might fit the unique strengths and needs of a given community. For example, some communities need greater access to quality, affordable food. Perhaps collaborations could be developed between grocery store chains, community centers, and public libraries to offer community members with free courses in how do you select healthy food? How do you plan for the week? What are the best strategies for increasing the healthy food choices available to your family at the lowest cost? All of these are critical skills for building the physical health of your community. Some communities have heads of the household working long hours so that their youth are often alone. Could senior centers work collaboratively with schools and community centers to provide homework support and mentoring resources for youth? Reciprocally, schools could promote clubs where youth make phone calls or volunteer their time playing games at senior centers, helping both groups realize the value added to having both in the community. Some communities have youth and adults who feel hopeless, that they will never earn a secure income. Perhaps medical centers could collaborate with high schools and vocational centers to provide structured mentorship for individuals who wanted to work in the medical field. Learning what these professionals required and meeting people who are already in these jobs could help young people and adults to build hope and faith that they can find future employment. What could community members do? Resilient communities require residents who speak up. Put the emergency numbers for Child Protective Services, domestic violence shelters, older adult protective services in your phone or on the wall of the store that you own or that you work in so that you're ready to call if the warning signs of trouble are present. Do you love animals? As you walk your dog, have you observed any animals that might be abused or neglected in your neighborhood? It is not uncommon that when an animal is being harmed, a person in the home is also being harmed. Call your local humane society or police station. When you are going about your daily life, have you noticed rundown parks or buildings that are sites for possible community risks, like drug deals? Consider writing letters to the editor of your local newspaper or encouraging a community leader to start a campaign to transform these risky environments into collaborative internet spaces for doing homework, relaxation spaces for just doing yoga and chilling out, where a mental health service could be physically present in case somebody needed help. Have you read something online or heard something while waiting in line that just disturbed you? Call 911. If you're concerned about the possibility of violence, you need to take action. We know there are many people in Uvalde, Texas, wondering if there could have been something they could have done to prevent the mass shooting on May 24th.
2 minutes, Pearl.
Consider how you would feel about being wrong after calling 911. Consider how you would feel about being right and not calling 911. It is better to be wrong and call, even though this can feel hard. We're already embarrassed before we've hit the first number. Successful advocacy requires repeated attempts at trying to support your community, even in the face of discouragement. Just trying and encouraging other people to try is to build your own sense of mastery, motivation, and belief that yes, you can make a difference and help your community be more resilient. There is more than 30 years of research that shows that there can be what's called the intergenerational transmission of violence, where you start out with violent parents abusing a child, and then in the next generation, that child is now an adult abusing their children. This happens because families and communities are learning environments. Public policies could help communities intentionally move forward to create learning environments that support the intergenerational transmission of strengths. We need public policies that provide easy access to experts who can help when individuals and families are struggling. We need increased public awareness that caregiving is difficult and that it is normal to reach out for help at times. We need increased financial support for gaining education in how to be a good caregiver or in affording educated caregiving help. We need to provide incentives so that our communities can develop unique collaborations so that we have in place unique, ongoing emotional infrastructures for building resiliency in our particular community. Citizens need to speak up to their local and state officials about what their community needs to build resilience and ask their official, what are you doing? Citizens can reach out to people in their neighborhoods who may be struggling and offer compassion. Store owners could decide to put emergency numbers for child abuse, elder abuse, animal abuse up in a visible place to help community members know who to call when they are themselves in trouble or suspect someone else is. Communities include everyone. Thus, everyone needs to be involved in building a resilient community with reduced violence, drug abuse, and other social ills. To take action and learn more about violence and what you could do to help prevent violence, please go to the free violence prevention pages at the website that will be put in the chat. If you feel you currently have time to be a big part of the solution, please join us. Our network, the National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence, is a coalition of the general public, psychologists, educators, lawyers, social workers. We are an inter-collaborative agency. Do you want to go out to the bright lights and sun of California? Join us at our 14th annual think tank in San Diego, where we plan our violence prevention activities for the next year. We are now going into our question and answer period. I hope that you have felt confident to put your questions into the chat, and Katie will facilitate the panel if everybody would make themselves visible again to answer questions.
Great. We actually do not have any questions in the chat, but I thought I saw someone just raise their hand. And so let me see. If that individual would like to re-raise their hand, I will know, but I don't have any hands raised right now because I can actually unmute people if they would like to ask verbal questions. But Pearl, do you want to stop your share so everyone's just seeing us while we have the conversation? And would you like me to put the post-test survey in the chat right now? I will do that.
That would be great, because after we're done with our question and answer period, I would very much appreciate if, again, it's 8 questions, so people could take some time to complete it.
Yes, just put it in the chat as well as the other links. So yes. Wonderful. Well, we actually don't have any specific questions, and it's a little awkward being the moderator where normally I'd throw out some questions with regards to different things. We did just get a question, will the presentation be shared? I'm happy sharing my slides. You know, I think Pearl, that'll be up to the presenters is my understanding with regards to
that's up to the presenters. However, this entire webinar, which is being taped, will be available free on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and put in National Partnership to End Interpersonal Violence Across the Lifespan, you'll get the video, which again has all the PowerPoint slides in them.
So a question did just come in, Pearl, with just regards to, I think it is an interesting, you know, so we talk about like building resilience and all of this, and then some people will push back with regards, but then you're just coddling children. You're not holding them accountable, or you're not disciplining them. And so do you all have some thoughts on maybe that?
This has happened to me quite a bit, where I've actually had, you know, principals tell me that, because and explaining to me that this child has been a problem since kindergarten. And what they don't realize is we've identified as early as kindergarten that about 4% of our boys and about 3% of our girls have already experienced a very high rate of adversity. And so they are, and some of them start to cry, but some of them throw chairs and refuse to share. And so we need to move in as early as we can before they become the really scary people who we don't feel safe if they're walking in our communities.
Yeah. Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say that here in the South, discipline usually means hitting a child. And so I try to use different words, like helping them to improve their behavior, helping them to be a stronger citizen, helping them to learn how to manage anger. And when I put it into those words, people are like, oh, you're gonna help my kid manage anger? Okay, what do we do? How do I help them stop spanking? And then I start looking, the other one I was gonna say is Liz Gershoff's work with the spanking and how we do know. That's another thing I like to show, or it's kind of a complex model, but I'll talk to parents about how spanking does all it really helps with is an immediate behavior and for a small period of time. And I'll just explain that in the long run, it actually causes more trouble. And I also learned from Randy Alexander, he always says, well, you know, the parents will say, well, I got hit and I turned out okay. And so what do you say next? And one of the things that you can say next is, hey, you know, could your kid be even better then? So I try to use that kind of resilience in those types of questions too.
Oh, that's great. It's funny because I have, my daughter just finished kindergarten, and there was a boy in her class who was always, oh my God, so-and-so did blah, blah, blah today. Oh my gosh, so-and-so did blah, blah, blah today. And I would have conversations with her about, obviously, if he's doing anything that's not okay to you, but I'm like, you know, he's probably struggling at home a little bit, and, you know, compassion focused and compassion forward. And recognizing that piece of it. And it's interesting because as the year has gone by, it has been less, oh my gosh, he did blah, blah, blah. And now it's, oh, well, we played today, or there was some other shifts with that, which I think it's, you know, it's really important. So another question came in that I think is directly lobbed to me, because it says, should a sexual offender ever be released from incarceration, or that kind of incarcerative sentence? And I have a lot to say about this, because it depends on the risk profile present for that individual. But I can take the opportunity to dispel a few myths, which is 90 to 95% of sexual abuse against children is perpetrated by someone known to the child, and very little is committed by a stranger. The rates are slightly higher for adults and adolescents. They're approximately 70% is by someone known to the individual. So when we look at sexual abuse, and as sexual abuse is a public health issue, which is my framework and where I come from within that arena, and I specialize, I'm a recognized expert in risk assessment, both sexual abuse and violence. And a lot of my work is looking at what do we need to do to reduce and prevent. And more often than not, many of our sentencing structure and our approaches are not actually rehabilitative or preventive focused. They're about incapacitation and removal, which in many ways actually, as I noted earlier, has the unintended consequence of increasing. So someone who is very, very, first time individual, no other, legal history and that kind of stuff, they can be effectively treated in many ways within the community and never even need an incarcerative sentence in order to address those factors and reduce their recidivism risk potential. And I'm of the mindset that what the research shows is when we incarcerate and overtreat or oversupervise lower risk individuals, it actually is counterproductive and results in worse outcomes and actually increases their risk potential because they get exposed to antisocial people. Their pro-social support networks and communities are often ripped from them when they're incarcerated for long periods of time. And I'm talking about for the individuals that are within those lower risk ranges. There are some groups that are higher risk, multiple offenders that should be incarcerated, and any release decision related to that needs to be very thoughtful. But I will also say that part of my work is I work with long-term incarcerated individuals who have committed homicides, things like sexual murders, domestic spousal homicides, and things like that. And in many cases, even those individuals have the rehabilitative potential to change. It just often takes a longer time. And so in short, my answer is yes. I think if we start approaching violence prevention in a more holistic, wraparound, and less punitive shame-based way, we will have better outcomes, bigger bang for our buck, and a greater reduction. And I also like to throw out that our criminal justice system is not the current way to really solve the sexual violence issue. When you look at the fact that only approximately 4 out of every 1,000 rapes actually goes through the criminal justice system and results in a conviction, when we're talking about justice and we're talking about healing and connection and rehabilitation and reformation, all of those pieces, only 4 are technically getting it through our criminal justice system. And so something is broken with that. And we really do need to rethink how we're addressing the violence issue. And I'm talking sexual violence in relationship to this question, but I would say in a broader piece with regards to all levels of violence. Please, Stacy, take that one on, the attorney.
Well, having been a prosecutor for 10 years and built up a program and started the first CAC in our state, I was all about locking up and getting the most amount of, there are many people in Angola that I have driven there to testify to keep them there. But what I can add to what you're saying, Katie, is I never met a child that wanted me to put their parent in jail. They
Exactly.
wanted me to get their parent to stop hitting them and stop crawling in bed with them at night. And I wasn't able to achieve that as a prosecutor. And I really believe we're never going to prosecute our way out of this problem, this epidemic. And if we look at just the children's words in the forensic interviews, more than 56% of kids, when the offender has confessed, have delayed disclosing. And if we look at the reasons why they delay, a lot of people think, oh, they delay because they're afraid of the offender. They have fear, but a lot of times their fear is that their dad, their mom, their grandpa is going to go to jail. And so our system is sort of working against the kids. We're not listening. And as a young prosecutor, I had kids that said to me they didn't want their dad to go to jail, but it was the only hammer that our system gives us. Mm-hmm. And I think we do need to be looking at this. The other point that I'd like to make is that we need to recognize children's advocacy centers used to be about 25% of the children who were walking up the steps were there because of another juvenile. Now it's hovering around 40%. Mm-hmm. And we, as a young prosecutor, we used to call them juvenile offenders. I would never say that now. I mean, these are youth with problematic sexual behaviors, and we now call it PSB. And we recognize that the impact to another child is an ACE, but yet the treatment and the recidivism is extremely low if we don't go about it punitive, which brings me to... Yeah.
I was just going to throw out some recidivism estimates when you're ready for that, because it's 5%. The longitudinal for youth adjudicated for sexual crimes is 5% moving forward. So most of them desist with intervention, and it is so different than adults convicted of sexual crimes. And so let's not over pathologize. No more super predator language and all of that horrible stuff from like the late 80s, early 90s that just are, and we still have policies in place that are based on those kind of lack of understandings of the development, the neurological, and all of that.
And you're going right to my heart when it comes to like policies. There's a lot of laws on the books in the state of Louisiana and in all of our states that are, the language is not trauma informed. You know, we're calling juveniles offenders instead of a child exhibiting problematic sexual behavior. We're using the P word when it comes to trafficking. There's a lot of things that we're doing that are labeling and harmful and shameful that we could easily change. And these would be very low reaches that you can reach out to your legislature, say, do you want to help trauma-informed policies? Let's change the language. We don't need to use the word, I hate to even say the word prostitution. And we certainly don't need to use the word pimp, because pimp is a glorification. You can pimp my ride, makes me crazy. But, you know, or you can buy a pimp costume for a toddler at Party City. But, you know, using the exploitation, using the trafficking language, getting away from child pornography and calling what it is, materials that are, you know, exploiting children and harmful.
Child sexual abuse materials is the term that we're, or child exploitation, CSEC or CSAM, because children do not engage in that. And that's a huge piece with regards to also the first person language shift. With not, you know, we don't call someone who is diagnosed with schizophrenia a schizophrenic anymore, because we understand. And the research has shown that there's actually it impacts public understanding and public response. The use of terminology, things like drug addicts, sex offender, felon, those types of languages, schizophrenic. Actually, the research has shown that the public response to those terms results in greater punitive, whereas if you describe the behavior and humanize in some ways. And again, it's not mitigating, it's not saying that what they did was okay, or removing or dismissing or minimizing the harm. It's just recognizing we're all humans and we all make mistakes, and even these people who have done significant harm are still a human being.
I really liked
sorry, Michelle was trying to jump in. I'm sorry.
I know I wanted to ask Michelle to respond to something, but go ahead.
So one thing I was going to say is I did run we used to call it sexually reactive groups with Lucinda Rasmussen. I would send you to some of her work.
No, I know Lucinda.
Yeah, she's amazing. And she has a trauma outcome process model that should help at the more individual level when you're working with each kid, just as a resource.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, I thought it was great when Stacy gave the example that you could just change the language and that would make the policy more trauma informed. And I thought, you know, one of the things that's very controversial now is people who don't like our current manner of policing say, oh, well, then you just want to not have police officers. And I wondered if Michelle could give just a few examples of what it would mean if you had trauma-informed policing.
Stacey, were you about to say something before we move on to that?
No, go you first. This is one of my favorite topics.
So, I actually have a police officer in my family. Well, we had one living in our home for quite some time. And the trauma-informed policing, I think, is the key to that. They're the first responder. So for me, I'm about informing teachers about resilience. And the other first responder for the sexual offenders would be that police officer. And even here, we have a lot of trauma that I'm picking up the pieces for simply people who are suicidal, harm to themselves, being put in handcuffs. So I absolutely agree with resilience, and then also just de-escalation techniques for the police officers so that it doesn't have to get to that next step where there is force happening. That first step, we do really awesome. Gainesville Police Department, which is about 2.5 hours south of us. They're our rival in football, but I do love UF for other reasons. But anyway, they actually became a no-hit zone, the entire police department. And that's a very big start, huge start. If a police officer, and they were trained in, no adult shall hit another kid, all those things. And anyone coming in was given the same respect, regardless of what they're being charged with. Again, starting with police, excellent question, Pearl. I really appreciate that.
Okay, Michelle, you have to get them to go to www.nohitzone.com and get on the map, because we're tracking this. And you made my day, Katie, doing the shout out for No Hit Zones, because that is my hobby. But
Cool.
that's fabulous. One of the other things that I have found with working with law enforcement, Pearl, is with the approach of trauma-informed arrest. A lot of times I have found that when I've done trainings for law enforcement, it's part of their post, they do occasionally have to, they cannot be avoided. They have to arrest parents oftentimes in front of children. And when I'll go into a group and I ask them, what are some of the things that they're considering and doing them? What are they thinking? Part of their mindset sometimes is that they feel like because the child has made a call that someone is hurt or they have a burn or they're injured, that the child is somehow going to get some feeling of retribution out of seeing a parent arrested. And so a lot of times their motivation is really not to be harmful in thinking that that's going to help the child. It's just like as a young prosecutor, I thought erroneously, because I didn't have a CAS course, and I missed the day in law school where they explained to me that children are bonded a lot of times to their adult offenders. And oftentimes, with other children with problematic sexual behaviors, those are siblings. And so we have this idea that they don't have the training. Police are not getting the training about that bond. And then when you explain that that's not helpful at all, that's going to be another part of the trauma for this child, they really will make the steps to make those policing decisions in a different way. And I find that if we can work together with all the folks that understand the brain and the triggers, and also recognize that it's a difficult job. I work with police my entire career. Yeah. It's a very difficult job that they have, and they too are triggered and are in fear. And there's so many things that our field, I feel like, could work together and help with.
It's that partnership again. I mentioned that multidisciplinary and the need for that. And it is so important because it really does come down simply to training. It's the same with training on how to interview survivors and understand the neurology of that, right? So wonderful discussion, but I do know we are almost at time, and in respect for everyone, I'm going to conclude us for today. So thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you, Pearl and Michelle and Stacy, and for inviting me on today as well to help with the presentation. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And please do that post survey if you could, because this is a grant project and Pearl is collecting data. So it's important stuff. So thank you all very much. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Alrighty, I'm ending. We're all going to get kicked off. Bye, everyone. Take care. Thank you.